The beginning of sacrifice. The hall was filled with a quiet tension, the kind of silence that comes before something unforgettable. Hundreds of people sat together, their eyes fixed on the stage where the lights glowed warm and steady. They were waiting to hear a story, but none of them were prepared for how deeply it would touch them. In the center of the stage stood Sundar Pichai. He was calm, humble, and gentle in his voice as he began to speak. He did not speak of his own achievements first, nor about success, but instead he chose to talk about the one person who shaped his life in ways the world could not imagine. He said, "Today I want to tell you about someone who never asked for recognition, someone whose sacrifice gave me every chance to stand here before you. I want to tell you about my mother, Lakhmi Pichai." The audience leaned forward. Some already felt a heaviness in their chest because they could sense the story was about love, struggle, and sacrifice. Sundar's voice was steady, but his eyes reflected deep emotion. He described Lakhmi not as a figure of pride or wealth, but as a woman of quiet strength. She was a woman who lived with simplicity, who believed in kindness, and who gave everything she had for her children. In his early years, Sundar remembered the small one-room home where they lived. He remembered how his mother would often skip meals so that he and his brother could eat. No one outside the family knew of these moments because Lakhmi never spoke of her own hunger. She smiled through it and said she was not hungry, but Sundar, even as a child, noticed the way her hands shook slightly when she worked in the kitchen. There was a day he could never forget. He was 8 years old, and he had returned from school, excited because he had scored well in his test. He ran to show his mother. She smiled warmly, kissed his forehead, and congratulated him. But as she hugged him, Sundar realized her clothes were thinner than usual, and he felt her body shiver from the cold. It was winter, and he later discovered she had given her only warm shawl to an elderly neighbor who had none. That day, Sundar told the audience, I understood for the first time what it meant to give. I saw that true strength was not in keeping what you have, but in giving what you can to others. The hall was silent, the kind of silence that comes when people are holding back tears. He went on to tell another memory. In their small home, money was always scarce. But Lakhmi insisted that education was more important than anything else. When Sundar wanted books for his studies, she would find a way, even if it meant selling a piece of jewelry she had kept from her marriage. There was one evening when Sundar noticed her wrist was bare. He asked her about the missing bangle she used to wear. She smiled and said lightly, "Things can be replaced, but your future cannot." That simple sentence stayed with Sundar his whole life. As he grew older, Sundar began to see the pattern of her sacrifices. She never complained. She never asked for thanks. She carried herself with grace even when she was tired, but the audience wanted to know more. Sundar could feel their hearts connected to the story, so he decided to share the most powerful part of all. He recalled a day when he received an acceptance letter for further studies abroad. It was a dream, but the cost was beyond anything they could imagine. Sundar thought of giving up the chance. It was too much for the family, but Lakhmi refused to let him quit. That night, she sat silently in the dim light of their home. Sundar remembered her eyes glistening as she whispered to him, "Your dreams are not yours alone. They are mine, too. If I must lose everything I have for you to reach them, then let it be so." Her words shook him, and even now, decades later, they echoed in his mind. The audience in the hall was visibly moved. Some wiped their eyes. Others sat frozen, lost in their own memories of the people in their lives who had sacrificed for them. Sundar's voice grew softer as he ended the first part of his story. My mother's sacrifice was not loud, not dramatic. It was made of small, quiet choices every single day. Those choices built me, and they built the future you see before you. This is why I say her story is greater than mine. The hall erupted in applause, But it was not the usual applause of celebration. It was the applause of respect, the kind that comes when people feel their hearts stirred by something pure and real. This was only the beginning, but already the audience knew they were hearing a story that would stay with them forever. The unseen struggle. The hall was still heavy with emotion after Sundar finished the first part of his story. The audience had clapped, but their hearts were not ready to move on. They wanted more. They wanted to understand the quiet woman behind the success, the woman who had sacrificed everything but rarely spoke about herself. Sundar could feel their attention. So he continued. He looked down for a moment, as if gathering strength from memories that were painful but precious. Then he raised his eyes and spoke again. "When I was young," he began softly, "I did not fully understand how much my mother carried on her shoulders. She looked calm every day, but behind her calm face was a world of struggle that she never revealed. She lived not for herself, but for her children." He described how Lakhmi would wake up before dawn, while the rest of the house was still asleep. The faint sound of utensils and the soft crackle of the stove filled the silence of the early morning. She would prepare simple food, wash clothes by hand, and sweep the small home before anyone else even opened their eyes. Sundar admitted that, as a child, he thought this was normal. But as he grew, he realized the truth. His mother never had a moment of rest. There was one morning, he remembered clearly. He woke up earlier than usual because he had a test. When he entered the kitchen, he saw his mother sitting on a stool, her hands pressed to her forehead. For the first time, he noticed her eyes red with exhaustion. Yet when she saw him, she quickly wiped her face and smiled, pretending nothing was wrong. She handed him a plate of food and said gently, "Eat well, you will need your strength today." That smile, Sundar told the audience, was not for herself. It was a shield to protect me from her pain. She wanted me to believe the world was kind, even when life was heavy for her. The audience listened in silence, and some bowed their heads, remembering their own mothers, fathers, or guardians who had hidden pain to protect them. But the struggle was not only in the home. Sundar explained how his mother dealt with the world outside. People often judged her for living with so little. Some neighbors whispered about her giving away her warm shawl. Others questioned why she sold her jewelry. But Lakhmi never let pride stand in her way. She ignored the gossip because for her, the future of her children mattered more than the opinion of others. There was a particular incident Sundar could never forget. He was about 12 years old when his school announced a science fair. He wanted to participate, but the materials were costly. When he told his mother, she looked thoughtful but did not answer immediately. 2 days later, she handed him the things he needed. Only years later did he learn the truth. She had taken extra work, cleaning clothes in several homes, just so he could stand with pride at that fair. She came home late those nights, her hands raw from scrubbing, but she never once complained, Sundar said, his voice trembling slightly. When I asked her why she pushed herself so hard, she said something I will never forget. A child's dream is a seed. If we do not water it now, it will never grow. The audience broke into soft murmurs. Many of them looked emotional, some holding tissues to their eyes. It was a line that spoke not only of one mother's sacrifice, but of universal truth. But Sundar did not stop there. He spoke of the days when food was scarce, when they ate the same dish for days because there was no money for variety. His mother would always serve everyone first, taking whatever was left. Sometimes it was only a small portion. Sundar recalled how once, when he insisted she eat more, she laughed gently and said, "I am already full. My hunger is seeing you happy." Those words pierced the audience. There was no sound now, only the soft breathing of hundreds of people sitting in deep reflection. Then Sundar revealed a twist in his story, something that many did not expect. Behind all her strength and sacrifice, Lakhmi also carried silent battles with her own health. Sundar discovered later in life that his mother often ignored her own needs, skipping medical checkups, avoiding medicines, just so she could save money. She put herself last in every way possible. "When I learned the truth," Sundar said quietly, "it hurt me deeply. I realized that her silence was not because she was free from pain, but because she refused to let her pain stop me from moving forward." For a moment, he paused. The hall was so quiet that even the soft hum of the microphone could be heard. Then he continued, "If there is one thing I have learned from her, it is this. True resilience is not loud. It is not about fighting with the world. It is about facing every challenge with humility, with quiet strength, and with kindness that does not fade even when life is unfair." As he said this, many in the hall nodded slowly. Some held their hands together as if in prayer. The story was no longer just about Lakhmi Pichai. It was about every person who has given silently, every sacrifice that goes unnoticed, every act of love that changes a life without demanding recognition. Sundar ended part 2 with a sentence that echoed through the hall. "My mother lived as if her life was not her own, but a gift she was meant to give away. And every sacrifice she made built the foundation of the man I became." The audience erupted in applause again, but this time it was mixed with tears. Some people stood, clapping with both hands, as if they were honoring not just Sundar's mother, but all the mothers, fathers, and loved ones who lived the same way. The story was only halfway revealed, yet it was already changing hearts in that room. The turning point, the audience was already deeply moved. Many sat with moist eyes, still thinking about the quiet strength of Lakhmi Pichai. But Sundar was not finished. He knew that the most powerful parts of his mother's story were yet to be told. The moments when her sacrifice turned into life-changing choices. He began again, his voice softer than before, as if each word carried a memory too heavy to speak. "There came a time in our lives," Sundar said, "when the struggle reached its sharpest point. It was the moment that tested not just my mother's strength, but her very soul." The hall leaned forward. Suspense hung in the air. Sundar explained that as he grew older, the cost of his education increased. Books, fees, and travel, all of it weighed heavily on the family. His father did what he could, but it was not enough. Sundar thought he might have to give up on his studies. He remembered sitting alone one evening, staring at his textbooks, feeling the heavy truth that dreams might not always survive reality. Then his mother walked in. She looked at him quietly, reading the pain in his eyes without a word. She sat beside him and asked softly, "Do you believe your dreams are worth fighting for?" Sundar hesitated. He wanted to say yes, but the weight of money made him unsure. His mother reached for her small wooden box, the one she kept carefully hidden. She opened it in front of him. Inside was the last of her wedding jewelry, a pair of earrings she had kept for years. They were not large, but they were the only valuables left. "These," she said, "were given to me with love when I married, but today I give them with greater love, because they will become your future." Sundar froze. He wanted to stop her, but the determination in her eyes silenced him. The audience in the hall gasped softly. Some of them had already guessed what she was about to do, but hearing it still shook them deeply. Sundar continued, his voice thick with emotion. "The next day, my mother went and sold those earrings. She used the money not for herself, not for the house, but for my education. That was the moment I realized the true meaning of sacrifice. She was not giving away jewelry. She was giving away a piece of her own history, her own identity, just so I could walk forward." His words filled the hall like a heavy wave. Many in the audience covered their mouths, fighting tears. But the story did not end there. Sundar revealed an unexpected twist. Not long after, their family faced another blow. His father lost his job for several months, and the home became even harder to sustain. Food became scarce again, bills piled up, and the fear of survival grew stronger. Sundar admitted that for the first time, he felt hopeless. Yet his mother did something surprising. Instead of breaking down, she stepped out and started helping in small ways, teaching neighborhood children, stitching clothes, and even cooking for families who needed meals. She carried herself with quiet pride, even though her body was exhausted. What amazed me most, Sundar said, was that even in the middle of her own struggle, she never stopped showing kindness to others. Once I saw her give food to a beggar outside our home. When I asked her why she did that when we barely had enough ourselves, she smiled and said, "Kindness is not measured by what we have. It is measured by what we are willing to share." Those words stunned the hall. Some people shook their heads slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of her wisdom. Sundar paused here, letting the silence deepen. Then he spoke with firmness, as if driving the lesson into the hearts of everyone listening. That was the turning point of my life. I realized that my mother's sacrifices were not just acts of survival. They were lessons. Every time she gave, she was teaching me. Every time she struggled, she was showing me resilience. Every time she smiled through pain, she was teaching me humility. And every time she shared with others, she was teaching me kindness. His voice softened. Her sacrifices became the foundation of my values. Without them, I would not be standing here before you today. The hall was silent again, but this silence was heavier than before. It was filled with reflection, with people thinking about their own lives, their own loved ones, and the sacrifices that had shaped them. Sundar ended part 3 with a simple but powerful line. My mother's story was not about losing, it was about giving. And in giving, she became greater than anyone I have ever known. The applause this time was thunderous, but mixed with tears. People were clapping not only for Lakhmi Pichai, but for every sacrifice that goes unseen in the world. The hidden strength, the applause slowly faded, but the emotions in the hall still lingered. People were leaning forward in their chairs, some holding their hands together as if in prayer. Sundar paused for a moment, letting them breathe, but inside he knew the next part of his mother's story carried even deeper weight. It was the chapter where her quiet strength revealed itself in ways no one expected. As I continued my studies, Sundar began, the world outside started to open up for me. I began to see opportunities. I began to dream of things that once felt too far away. But every step forward was not easy. With every dream came more challenges, and it was my mother who stood as the unseen strength behind me. He shared a memory that burned in his heart. One year, when exam season arrived, Sundar fell sick. He was weak, with fever and cough, unable to prepare properly. The exams were important, the kind that would decide whether he could continue on his path. Sundar admitted he felt defeated. His mother, however, did not let him give up. He recalled her sitting by his side late into the night, reading his textbooks aloud while he lay weak in bed. She repeated every line with patience, making sure he understood even when his eyes struggled to stay open. She sacrificed her own rest so he could keep learning. When I think of strength, Sundar said, his voice low, I do not think of loud voices or powerful fists. I think of my mother's soft voice reading page after page through the night. That is the strength that shaped me. The audience murmured, touched by the image of a mother reading by lamplight to a sick child, carrying his dream as if it were her own. But Sundar then revealed something unexpected, something that shook the room even more. He said, There were times when I doubted myself. I wondered if I truly had the ability to go further. I even thought of stopping my studies and helping earn money for the family instead. I believed it was my duty. But when I told my mother this, she grew more serious than I had ever seen her." He paused, remembering her words. She looked at me and said, "Your duty is not to shrink yourself for us. Your duty is to rise so that one day you can carry others higher." The hall filled with silence again. The line echoed in every ear. It was a moment of conflict, a battle between immediate survival and long-term vision. Sundar confessed that it was not easy for him to hear. He wanted to help. He wanted to remove the burden from his parents, but his mother's eyes told him she would not allow it. "That night," Sundar continued, "I understood that her sacrifices were not meant to hold me down with guilt. They were meant to lift me, to push me forward even when I felt unworthy." Then came another twist, one that revealed even more about her character. During one particularly difficult month, the family could not afford electricity for several days. The house fell into darkness each night. Sundar remembered sitting with his books, unable to see clearly, but his mother refused to let him stop studying. She lit a small kerosene lamp and sat beside him, holding it up while he read. The smoke made her cough, her eyes watered from the fumes, but she did not move. "I told her to rest," Sundar said softly, but she shook her head and whispered, "Darkness must never stop you. If I must hold this lamp for hours, then I will." Many in the audience now wiped their eyes. The image of a mother holding a burning lamp for her son to study became etched into their minds, a symbol of sacrifice that went beyond words. Sundar's voice grew heavier as he added, "What people must understand is that these sacrifices were never big gestures made for praise. They were quiet, everyday choices, but those choices built the path I walked." He admitted something else, too, something personal. "When I later traveled abroad for my studies, I carried her words with me. I carried her image holding that lamp, her eyes filled with both pain and love. Whenever I felt alone, whenever I struggled, I thought of her, and I could keep going." The hall erupted in applause again, but it was not the cheerful kind. It was the kind that came with tears, the kind that comes when people feel their own lives reflected in the story being told. Then Sundar closed part 4 with a line that struck the audience deeply. "My mother's strength was invisible to the world, but to me, it was the light that turned every darkness into a lesson." The applause rose once more, but many in the audience stayed silent, their hearts too heavy to speak. The bridge to dreams. The hall had grown quieter with each part of the story. People were no longer just listening. They were living inside the words. Sundar's voice had carried them through hunger, sacrifice, and strength, and now he was ready to show them how those silent choices shaped his path in unexpected ways. "After all the years of sacrifice," Sundar began, "a moment finally came when life placed a bridge in front of me. A bridge my mother had built with her quiet devotion. It was the chance to study further, far beyond the small town I grew up in. But to cross that bridge, we needed more than courage. We needed resources we did not have." He paused, remembering. The opportunity had come in the form of an admission letter. Sundar had been accepted into a program that could change his future forever. It was everything they had hoped for. But when they saw the cost written on the paper, silence filled the house. Sundar's father lowered his eyes. Sundar himself felt the weight of guilt pressing on him. He thought of letting it go, but his mother refused to let the dream die. "She sat with me that night," Sundar told the audience, "and she said, 'If the path has opened, then we must walk it. Do not fear the cost. I will find a way.'" The audience leaned in. Everyone wanted to know what she did. Sundar explained how his mother went from door to door, humbly asking relatives, friends, and neighbors if they could lend or help in any way. Some turned away. Some gave small amounts. She faced rejection, even harsh words. People told her she was chasing a fantasy, that such dreams were not for families like theirs. But Lakhmi stood firm. She gathered every small contribution, every coin, every rupee. Slowly, painfully, she built enough to at least begin. What struck me most, Sundar said, was not just her determination, but her silence. She never told me about the humiliation she faced. I learned later from others. She protected me even from the pain of knowing how much she suffered. The hall was silent, heavy with respect. But there was more. Sundar revealed a twist that few expected. When the day finally came for him to leave, Sundar noticed that his mother's old trunk, her box of clothes, looked nearly empty. He asked her about it. She smiled and said she had given many of her things away to others who needed them more. Only later did Sundar understand the truth. She had sold several of her belongings quietly, without telling anyone, just to cover the last of his travel expenses. That moment broke me, Sundar said softly. I realized she was not just giving her jewelry or her comfort. She was giving pieces of her own life so I could build mine. Many in the audience wiped tears again. The story was not just about money. It was about love that stripped itself bare to see another rise. Sundar then described the day he left for his studies. The train station was crowded, noisy, filled with people rushing. Yet in the middle of that chaos, his mother stood silently, holding his hand. Her grip was strong, but her eyes were wet. She said only one line before he boarded the train. Go forward, but never forget where you came from. The words pierced the hall like an arrow. People whispered them under their breath, as if holding them close for themselves. Sundar admitted that he carried those words in his heart everywhere he went. In classrooms, in libraries, in crowded streets of foreign cities, whenever he felt lost, those words became his compass. But the part that made the audience hold their breath was this. I want you all to know, Sundar said, his voice trembling slightly, that every step I took in that new world was not mine alone. It was my mother walking with me. She had built that bridge from her own sacrifices, and I was only crossing it. For a moment, the hall was filled with silence so deep it felt like a prayer. Then Sundar added, opportunities did not appear because we had wealth. They appeared because my mother's humility, resilience, and kindness created them. She showed me that true power does not come from what we own. It comes from what we give away. The audience erupted again, clapping, crying, some standing to honor the truth of his words. Sundar ended Part 5 with a line that carried both gratitude and pain. My success is not my story. It is her story, written in the language of sacrifice. The echo of her voice. The hall was heavy with silence after Sundar's last words. People felt the weight of his mother's sacrifices, but they also sensed there was more to come. Sundar's eyes softened as he continued, his voice calm but filled with emotion. When I left my home for the first time, he said, I stepped into a world that felt much larger than I had ever known. The streets were wider, the buildings taller, and the people spoke in ways I struggled to follow. It was exciting, but it was also frightening. I was alone in a place far from everything familiar. And yet, even there, my mother's presence never left me. I carried her voice inside me. He explained how life abroad was not easy. Money was always tight, meals were often skipped, and there were days he studied with an empty stomach. Sometimes he worked late hours, doing small jobs just to survive. The weight of loneliness pressed on him in quiet moments. But whenever I felt weak, Sundar said, I remembered her voice. I remembered her saying, darkness must never stop you. And in those moments, it felt as if she was beside me, holding that lamp once again, pushing me to keep going. The audience could picture it. A young student sitting alone in a dim room, fighting hunger and doubt, but carried forward by the memory of his mother's strength. Then Sundar revealed something unexpected. "There was a night," he said, "when I almost broke. I had failed in an assignment, I was hungry, and I had no money left in my pocket. I sat in my small room thinking I had made a mistake leaving home. I thought of giving up. But then I opened the drawer of my desk, and there I found a small folded piece of paper. It was a note my mother had slipped into my bag before I left." The hall grew still. Everyone wanted to hear what the note said. Sundar's voice trembled as he recalled it. She had written, "If the road feels too hard, remember that I have walked harder roads to bring you here. Do not stop. Every step you take is a step we take together." The audience gasped softly. Some clutched their hands tightly, unable to stop their tears. Sundar admitted that reading those words gave him the strength to stand again. He realized his journey was not only his own, it was his mother's journey too, carried through him. But the suspense grew deeper when Sundar shared another twist. As he worked and studied, he sometimes sent small letters home, but often months passed before he could afford even a simple phone call. And yet somehow, his mother always seemed to know when he was struggling. He would receive a short letter from her just at the right moment, filled with encouragement and love. "I once asked her how she knew," Sundar said with a faint smile. "She replied, 'A mother does not need to see her son to know his heart. Distance cannot break that bond.'" The hall erupted with murmurs of agreement. Many in the audience nodded, some whispering about their own mothers, their own families. Sundar then told of the day when, after months of hardship, he finally succeeded in an important project. It was the first step toward his career, the first sign that his future was beginning to take shape. He wanted to celebrate, but when he looked around, he was alone. So he closed his eyes and imagined his mother standing beside him, smiling with pride. He whispered to himself, "This is yours, not mine." His voice softened as he told the hall, "That is how it was for me. Every achievement, every success I did not see as mine. I saw it as my mother's victory, the result of her unseen struggle." The audience clapped softly, but many could not stop their tears. And then Sundar ended part 6 with a line that echoed through the hall. "Even when she was thousands of miles away, my mother's voice was louder than the noise of the world. It was her strength that carried me when my own strength was gone." The hall exploded in applause, people rising to their feet, clapping with respect and emotion. It was no longer just a story. They felt it in their own hearts. The final tribute. The applause from part 6 slowly faded, but the emotions in the hall remained strong. People sat with their hands folded, their faces still wet with tears. Sundar took a slow breath and stepped forward. Everyone knew that what came next would be the most emotional part of all. They could feel it in the weight of the silence. "After years of struggle," Sundar began softly, "I finally reached a place where life became stable. I got a job. I started earning. I was able to live without fear. But the first thing I wanted to do, even before celebrating, was to go back home, to see my mother again." His voice grew gentle like the hush before a storm. He described how he returned to his town with a small suitcase, a heart full of memories, and one dream in mind, to surprise his mother and tell her she would never have to worry again. He wanted to hold her hand and say, "Your sacrifices were never forgotten. Today, I have come back to give something back to you." But life, as it often does, had its own plan. Sundar paused. The hall grew tense. "When I reached home," he said slowly, "I found my father standing at the door. He looked older, thinner. And when I asked about my mother, he said she had fallen ill a few days ago. She was resting inside." The audience grew quiet, their hearts tightening. Sundar rushed into the room. There, on a simple bed, lay Lakhmi Pichai. Her face looked calm, peaceful, but weaker than he remembered. Her eyes opened slowly when she heard his voice, and when she saw him, a tear rolled down her cheek, but her lips curved into a smile. "She tried to sit up," Sundar said, voice trembling, "but I stopped her gently. I held her hands and said, 'I made it, Amma. I did it. We did it together.'" Tears flowed freely in the hall now. Some people covered their mouths, others pressed their hands to their chests. Sundar shared what happened next. "She held my hand tightly and whispered something I will never forget. She said, 'I knew you would. I never doubted you. I just wanted to see you one more time. Now I can rest.'" His voice broke for a moment. The audience sat completely still. He looked down briefly, then continued. "That night, she slept peacefully. And by morning, she was gone." The gasp across the audience was soft but powerful. People lowered their heads. Many wept quietly. Sundar stood still for a few seconds, then lifted his eyes. "My mother did not live to see everything that followed. She did not see me rise in my career. She did not see me speak at events, meet world leaders, or build a life of stability. But she saw the moment that mattered most. She saw her son come home, not in defeat, but with pride." The audience clapped gently. A wave of soft, respectful applause filled with love. But Sundar was not done. He said, "After her passing, I made a decision. I did not want her story to disappear into silence. I wanted the world to know who Lakhmi Pichai was, not just my mother, but a woman whose sacrifices made everything possible." He told how he began supporting schools in her name, helping children who came from families like his. He helped mothers who were struggling, just like his mother had. And everywhere he went, he carried her story. "Because," he said, "her legacy is not just in me. It is in every person who dares to dream because of someone else's silent sacrifice." The audience rose to their feet again, this time not for a man who had succeeded, but for a woman whose name would never be forgotten. Sundar ended his speech and the story with one final line, simple, pure, and unforgettable. "Her life was not written in books, but it was written in my soul. And today, by sharing her story with you, I have given her the place she always deserved, not just in my heart, but in the hearts of all who listen."